Behind the cold stone walls of a forgotten European palace lies a story few dare to tell. It's a tale of a woman trapped not by war or betrayal, but by her own blood. Her name rarely appears in history books as a heroine, and yet, her life reflects a far more haunting legacy, that of a family so obsessed with keeping their bloodline pure that it doomed their descendants to generations of suffering. This is the story of the most inbred woman in history that in the royal courts of Europe. Long before science warned of genetic disorders, kings and queens believed something else, that their blood was superior. They were convinced that mixing it with commoners would taint the divine right of rulers. So they did the unthinkable. They married their OWNO family, followed this path more fanatically than the Habsburgs, one of the most powerful dynasties in Europe. Over centuries, they intermarried cousins, uncles, nieces, all in the name of power, purity, and political alliance. But in their pursuit of a perfect bloodline, they unknowingly created a genetic nightmare. Out of this nightmare came a woman. Her name was Joanna, later known as Juana la Loca or Joanna the Mad. Her madness, however, wasn't sudden. It was seeded long before her birth, a consequence of centuries of inbreeding, pressure, and pain. Joanna was born into Spanish royalty, the daughter of Queen Isabella of Castile and King Ferdinand of Aragon. Her parents were already closely related. That union, blessed with political power, also passed on fragile genes that would haunt their children. Joanna, as a child, showed signs of emotional fragility. She was intelligent, sensitive, and deeply introspective. But behind those thoughtful eyes were hints of storms yet to come. Her mother, Queen Isabella, a fierce and religious woman, believed discipline and religious fear were keys to virtue. When Joanna expressed doubt in religious doctrine, she was punished, locked away, starved, beaten. The cracks in her mind were forming. Still, Joanna was destined for marriage, like all royal daughters. Her match was Philip the Handsome, a prince of the Austrian Habsburgs. He was beautiful, charming, and entirely unfaithful. For Joanna, it was love at first sight. For Philip, it was political convenience. What began as a fairy tale ended as a tragedy. Joanna became obsessed with Philip. He cheated on her openly. She begged, she cried, she raged. Her jealousy became uncontrollable. She would scream through the palace, chase away his mistresses, and suffer terrible fits of despair. Her mind, already delicate, began to crack under the strain. But her world truly shattered when Philip suddenly died. Joanna refused to believe it. She kept his coffin beside her. She slept near it, touched it, spoke to it. They said she went mad. But was it madness? Or was it the breaking point of a woman raised in a world where love was a lie, marriage was politics, and blood came before everything? She wandered with Philip's coffin across the countryside, believing he might awaken. Guards followed her. Priests whispered prayers. People watched in horror and sorrow. It wasn't just grief they saw. It was the end result of a dynasty that had turned in on itself. Joanna, once a queen of unimaginable wealth, was soon locked away by her own family. They called her unstable. They said she was unfit to rule. But those closest to her knew the truth. Her mind was broken not by fate, but by design. She had inherited the sins of her ancestors. Her prison was a monastery. For over 40 years, she lived there, speaking rarely, staring endlessly, refusing to eat or drink unless ordered. Her daughter was taken from her, her title stripped. The woman once meant to rule the world became a silent ghost behind iron doors. And the bloodline? It continued. Her son, Charles V, would go on to rule the Holy Roman Empire. But he, too, would marry within the family. The cycle did not break. The curse lived on. The woman once called the Mad Queen faded from the world without a crown, without her husband, without her children. But her legacy, the darkness of what had been done in the name of royal pride, did not disappear. It multiplied. Juana's son, Charles V, inherited not just Spain, but a genetic time bomb. Like his mother, he believed in keeping the bloodline pure. His marriage was no different, a union with his own cousin. And like that, the chain of inbreeding continued. And with it, deformities became more visible, more disturbing, more tragic. Future Habsburgs were born with enormous jaws that made it impossible to chew or speak properly. Their tongues were too large for their mouths. Some were mentally disabled. Others died before adulthood. Their portraits tried to hide the truth, but the truth was loud and monstrous. This family was destroying itself from the inside out. One of the most horrifying examples came generations later. Charles II of Spain, great-great-grandson of Juana. He was born so physically and mentally deformed that people believed he was possessed. He couldn't talk properly until he was 4. He couldn't walk until he was 8. He drooled constantly, suffered epileptic fits, and remained childlike, even in adulthood. And still, the Habsburgs tried to make him marry, desperate for an heir. He couldn't produce one. The line was ending. And with it, the royal obsession with pure blood came to a devastating conclusion. But if Charles was the tragic result, Juana was the beginning of the end. During her decades of confinement, she rarely spoke. But when she did, witnesses described it as haunting, her voice calm, emotionless, as if she no longer belonged to this world. Priests tried to cure her. Her family sent letters demanding her obedience. But she stayed, quiet, still, unmoving, a statue carved out of grief and betrayal. And perhaps, somewhere inside her, she knew that she had become the symbol of a system that needed to fall. In modern times, historians began to re-examine her life. Was she truly insane? Or was she simply overwhelmed by a world that treated her like a pawn, a world that took her mind, her body, and finally her soul? They now believe that much of her suffering was caused not just by inbreeding, but by abuse, by neglect, by being forced to live a life not her own. And more painfully, they believe she was silenced intentionally, because her existence reminded them all of what their dynasty had done. She wasn't just a woman who lost her mind. She was a woman buried alive by the consequences of her family's pride. Today, when people study genetics and warn about inbreeding, they use the Habsburgs as the most famous example. Their pride, their arrogance, their defiance of nature. It all led to their downfall. But behind those charts and medical reports is a forgotten face, Juana's face. A woman who was beautiful, intelligent, and kind, until her world made her otherwise. Her madness, if it was madness, was inherited, bred, cultivated by royal decisions. No fairy tale ends here. No triumph, just silence. A queen with no kingdom, a mother with no children, a wife with no love. Her only legacy? A lesson. That blood is not sacred. That family lines, when stretched and twisted by pride, eventually break. And when they do, it's not kings who suffer. It's daughters like Juana, mothers, wives, women who never got to choose. The most inbred woman in history is more than a medical case. She is a mirror, and what we see in her eyes is what unchecked power can do to even the most innocent.